Great. It worked. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, I had some technical problems.
Good morning.
This all sorted itself out. Great. Good morning. Okay. Well, I guess we can start then.
Yes, just I'll do my short introduction.
Sure. Okay.
So, hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this course on 12 links of dependent origination with our dear teacher, Geshe, Kelsang, Wangmo. My name is Tomer. I'll be the host today. I'd like to remind you that this class, as well as all the classes in the weekend, are streamed live on YouTube, where you can watch them. Also, in YouTube, you can see previous recordings of all classes and meetings we had in the past. You can get there if you search for DFI Israel channel in YouTube, or if you go to the Dharma Friends of Israel website and click the YouTube icon. I would like to invite you to turn on your cameras. This gives for a much nicer atmosphere. We can all see each other. A teacher can see us. It really feels like a class. I sent through chat the text for this class. Also, you can find it in the Dharma Friends website. If you go to the page of this meeting, where you pressed on the Zoom link, on the bottom you have text. Over there you can find the text for this course. In the same page, in the middle, you have a donation box, a donation button. And for pressing it, of course, you can donate. As you probably know, all activities of the Dharma Friends are done only by volunteers and financed only by donation. So if you'd like to practice generosity and donate for the teacher and to help support the continuation of the Dharma Friends of Israel activities, then you can do so by pressing the button, by either PayPal or bank transfer. This was also sent by chat, as you can probably see. Okay, so getting to this course, one last thing. This is a course in the program of Buddhism A to C. This is a structured program to teach us all the basics of Buddhism. This is a 7-year program. We're right now in the 4th year. So there's already been a lot of material. If you're new to this, you can catch up on the previous courses in YouTube. They're all recorded. You can watch it over there. So if this gets a little progressive, then you should know that the basis is recorded and you can watch there and catch up on the material. That's all for me, I think. Thank you very much for the time. I'd like to wish us all a very interesting teaching, as I'm sure it will be. And we'll ask Geshe, if you would please teach us.
Okay. All right. And thank you very much for that. So let's start as we usually start with the motivation. One of the most important parts of the teachings. So we start with a few moments of breathing meditation just to calm the mind. It's a short visualization. We have, then generating the motivation, and then we've got some prayers. Okay. Please switch off your microphone if it's still on. And then in the space in front of you, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni, who's inseparable from your personal Lama. And who's a manifestation of enlightened wisdom and compassion. Wearing the saffron-colored robes of a monk. Seated in the full lotus position. On top of an open lotus, a sun disk and a moon disk. Even if you can't clearly visualize him, just feel the presence of the embodiment of enlightenment right in front of you. With qualities that in its potential form all of us carry in our mental consciousness. And surrounding this visualization and ourselves are all sentient beings. Who, like us, have the potential to attain the same qualities as the Buddha. But who, like us, are caught in this cycle of existence due to their basic misapprehension of reality. Giving rise to a huge scale of different problems and difficulties. In particular, mental suffering such as fear, depression, hopelessness, and so forth. So let's generate a sense of affection based on the understanding that no one deserves to suffer. A sense of closeness towards all these sentient beings who are just like us. and generate the wish, may they be free from any type of suffering, in particular from their basic misapprehension of reality. And may I be able to bring this about. May I be able to free them from all their limitations. And then generate the determination, I will liberate all sentient beings from their misapprehension of reality and everything else that limits them. And since realistically this is only possible once we become fully enlightened, let's generate bodhicitta. That is the determination to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. And that it enables us to be most effective to benefit sentient beings. And holding on to this motivation without letting it go, let's recite the prayers together while reflecting on the meaning of each word. I take refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay. Now to the second part of the 12 links. Well, we've basically talked about the 12 links already in its entirety, and I chose to do it that way so you get some overview what they refer to, but of course there are more details we can go into regarding those 12s, and that's what I'm going to do over this weekend, and of course also take it towards the Mahayana motivation, towards generating more love and compassion, not just for ourselves, but also for other sentient beings. Okay. But first, to give you to provide you with more details on what we discussed last time, just to make more sense of it. Some parts of it are easier and some parts we require more time. Other parts are a little bit more complicated. Anyway, I'll try to cover all of them and also have time for questioning and of course, time for questions and time for meditation. But first, I'd like to ask you, once you set your motivation, extremely important, but also to teach with a particular attitude. So, not to be intent on hearing something new, something that you haven't heard before, but rather for your attention to be directed inwards. And inwards in the sense that you take whatever you hear personally and use it to apply to your daily kind of problems, difficulties, in whichever way you find this works for you. Okay. And what's extremely important is also to understand that as long as we see what we learn here is distant from ourselves, that long we won't understand the teachings to its fullest. That's why I emphasize the importance of, well, not just meditating on what you learn here in a kind of formal setting, but to also apply it to your daily life. Check how anything that you learn here applies to you personally. How can you bring this into your own personal, daily life, into your routine on a daily basis? And to be also aware, Buddhist practice takes time. It's a process. It's a continuous process because what we basically do is we recognize habitual patterns that we've developed over a long period of time. And now we try to fast recognize them and then slowly let go of them and replace them with positive habits, with positive habitual kind of patterns of thought, patterns of activities, and so forth. And like I said, that takes time. And really what we're doing here mainly is we deal with emotional states of mind, with emotions. Negative emotions, we'll try to replace those. Fear, anxiety, and then of course destructive negative emotions such as anger, aversion, resentment, attachment, jealousy, envy, and so forth. And instead we replace them with positive types of emotions such as affection towards others, ourselves and others, affection, love, compassion, generosity, patience, etc. And those emotions can be only replaced if it makes sense to us. This is why we meditate. We apply meditation, which is just another way of saying familiarizing ourselves with positive states of mind. But in which way do we do that? Well, there are two types. There's analytical meditation. There's stabilizing meditation. You're familiar with those two. And when it comes to analytical meditation, that's the most powerful tool at this point in time. Of course, stabilizing one-pointed meditation helps us in the process of analyzing phenomena and in taking them deeper. But what we mainly deal with is analytical meditation with regard to these topics, and that is based on logic. It is based on a process of analyzing certain aspects. And when we come to a conclusion with regard to these aspects, such as impermanence, selflessness, and so forth, dependent arising, very important, and we allow our insight into these different aspects to go deeper into deeper levels of our mind, then they will affect our emotional response. In other words, reduce negative emotions and naturally bring forth positive emotions. This is with regard to the wisdom aspect, the understanding aspect of Buddhism, which we'll deal with when we talk about, like I said, impermanence, etc. So with regard to how phenomena actually exist, when we deal with that. And then, of course, there's also the emotional aspect. There's the method aspect of Buddhism when we meditate on love, compassion, patience, etc. Based on the understanding we also gain, but when in a meditative session, we specifically generate love, compassion, patience, and so forth. So therefore, analytical meditation can be again subdivided into two forms, into two types, in that, in particular, when we meditate on the method path, on the method aspects of Buddhism, which, like I said, includes tolerance, affection, and so forth, there's one way in which we take these particular states of mind as the object and we analyze them, that they're beneficial, what are their benefits, how do they help us, etc. Or that's one way. Or these states of mind, also again based on analysis, we develop them. It's not that we meditate on them as in analyzing them, their advantages and so forth, but we generate them in our own continuum. So those are two types of meditation: taking them as an object and analyzing them, or based on analysis, on the fact that, well, we're all connected to other sentient beings. Their basic mental kind of structures the same as ours, etc. Analyzing in that way, we're able to generate love and compassion. So the object of meditation is not meditated on, but we become, or our mind turns into, becomes the object of meditation. All right. Now, based on that understanding, we'll do meditations in that way, and I'll explain you which we'll do at a specific time. But we start off with the analytical meditation. That is not a meditation where you rise as the object of meditation, but rather where you analyze. And what you need to analyze as part of this topic is you need to analyze dependent arising. But then before I go into details on that, I'd like to share with you kind of, usually they're described as 4 types of reasoning, but the word reasoning is a little confusing. It's actually 4 factors that you analyze. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama mentions them often, but oftentimes he doesn't give more explanation. He rather quotes them and then moves on. And you've probably heard about them, but I'd like to remind you of them. When you analyze certain aspects, for instance, 4 factors I'm saying. So one factor is you analyze the function of a particular object. You analyze the function. What function does it perform? In the context of an analytical meditation where you meditate on the object. What would be an example? Well, if you meditate on a karmic action that you perform, virtues or non-virtues, it performs the function of producing or creating certain experiences in the future. And due to every cause having a corresponding result, well, if it's a virtues, depending on the motivation, virtuous action, of course, it leads to positive experiences. If it's a harmful kind of motivation that governs this action, it leads to harmful, that is negative experiences. So that is the function, for instance, and we can reflect upon karmic actions on the basis of their function. A second aspect is based on valid proof. So when we meditate on a valid proof, on the valid evidence that proves the existence of this, that, and the other. So taking dependent arising, that is the proof that establishes phenomena don't exist inherently. Okay, so that would be an example where, based on your understanding of dependent arising, you conclude, therefore, things cannot exist independently, objectively, as they appear to us. That's the second type of analysis. The third type is when you analyze dependence. So dependence, not dependent arising as such, was just taken as a proof, but just the dependence of phenomena. For instance, the fact that you are a person, you exist as a person because you're dependent on parts, on parts, body and mind, or being a person in dependence on labeling. So if you take dependence in particular and analyze the different types of dependence. And then lastly is the meditation on the nature of your object, the nature of the object that you meditate on. For instance, impermanence is in the nature of changing moment by moment. So that changing nature, well, meditating on that, in that way you understand impermanence. Okay, so those four are not mutually exclusive. Of course, if you meditate on one, you may meditate on the other, but that gives you a sense of what is possible when you analyze things. Their functions, valid proof. You take the object as valid proof. You take it just from the point of view of its functions. You take things in terms of their dependence or the nature of an object. All right. Now that takes us right away into the topic of dependent arising, because the 12 links, as you know, are described as the 12 links of dependent arising. Now, where does the Buddha talk about dependent arising? In particular, here in this context, dependent arising with regard to the 12 links. There's a particular sutra called the Rice Seedling Sutra. And in that sutra, he sets forth these 12 links by describing kind of 3 attributes or 3 features that impermanent phenomena possess. So impermanence is an extremely important idea. Impermanence as in like understanding. When you learn Buddhist philosophy, you start off with understanding there are those things that exist and there's that which doesn't exist. We need to discern between those two, that which exists and that which doesn't exist. And then with regard to that which does exist, well, you can divide that into that which is impermanent and that which is not impermanent. That which is impermanent is extremely important in terms of understanding its impermanence, understanding its ever-changing nature. But that's not enough. It's not enough to understand that they're changing, that things that are impermanent are always changing from moment to moment. There's more we need to understand about these phenomena as our mind, our body, because the understanding that comes in here is the understanding of cause and effect. How phenomena are, well, anything that is impermanent is also a cause and it is an effect at the same time. It's both a cause and it's an effect. It's a cause of its later moment, of a moment, the moment that it becomes, like it turns into. So right now it is the cause of a moment later, of its later continuum, and it's the result of its former continuum. In that way, you get a sense that anything that is impermanent forms a continuum. It's a continuum made of moments. And these moments, the change of all these moments takes place since an earlier moment is the cause of a later moment, is the cause of a later moment, and so forth. Okay. And in that way, an earlier moment causes a later moment only because it changes. Due to this constant change, so something acts as a cause, it only acts as a cause if it itself changes in that process. And it can only act as a cause if there are other factors that support it in its transformation to transform into the effect, that is, into its later continuum. Okay, Now that idea is extremely important. And of course, here we have the idea of dependent arising already, because every effect has arisen in dependence on a cause that has transformed into it, and lots of cooperative conditions that assist this process, that assist the cause that has turned into the object in this process of transformation so that it can become the result. But then this result is only momentary, in that it also changes again with the assistance of other factors to become a later moment, and so forth and so forth. So in that way, you have continua, you have continuums. And this idea describes to us dependence on causes and conditions, with causes being that which turns into the phenomenon, and conditions being the other factors, the other causes, as they're also described, or as they're also called, or the other conditions, cooperative conditions that assist this cause and its transformation to become the present result. That is described, and so this present result is dependent on causes and conditions. And everything that is impermanent, whatever is impermanent, mind, body, any moment in time that you focus on, well, you can be certain that it's dependent on causes and conditions. And this dependent arising that is at work here, dependence on causes and conditions, and there are other forms of dependence, which I'll mention. But this type here in particular, it's a dependent arising, which means that it depends, it comes together, it connects with something, and it relies on something. So that is the meaning of dependent arising. In Tibetan, it's Denjing Jawa Jungwa, which means arisen in dependence and in connection with something, which translates the Sanskrit word pratitya samutpada. Pratitya has three meanings, as I talked about before. It's like depending on something, to connect, to meet with something, but that actually kind of means more like come together or connect to something. And then number three, to rely on something, to depend on, to rely on. And those two words are very similar. And then to connect to something, to come together with something. Not come together literally, but rather as in like being connected to something. And in Tibetan, the word Denjing Dawa Jungwa. So samutpada means to arise, to occur. And in Tibetan, the translation is to occur, Denjing Dawa Jungwa, to occur in dependence and in connection with something. So in dependence on something and in connection with something, things occur. That is really the connotation of the word Denjin Dawa Jungwa, or Dendel, said short in Tibetan, or Pratitya Samutpada, again, arising in dependence and reliance on, or in connection to something. All right, so it gives you just a sense of the words. And like we've heard, here we're dealing mainly with dependence on causes and conditions. Now, as I earlier stressed early on, the sutra that describes that is called the Rice Seedling Sutra. And it's a kind of a longer sutra, but there are three aspects or three descriptions that are considered to be really important. One is the sentence, because this exists, that occurs. Because this exists, that occurs. That's one sentence. That's important. That needs to be explained. Another sentence is, because this has been produced, that has been produced. So because this exists, that occurs. Because this has been produced, that has been produced. And then the last is, well, conditioned by ignorance, there's formative actions. Conditioned by formative actions, there is consciousness, and so forth, all the way to, well, conditioned by birth is aging and death. All right, so it describes the 12 links. And these three aspects, these three kind of descriptions, they all describe something different. The first is saying that because this exists, that occurs. What does that describe? It describes the fact that phenomena, their arising depends on causes and conditions. So impermanent. We're talking still about impermanent phenomena. That you yourself, you are the result of causes and conditions, and not just one cause and one condition, but numerous different causes and conditions. Each moment of you is the result of numerous causes and conditions. That is a feature that is described, the feature of unmoving, on being, unmovability, which is a really weird word. What does that mean? It means that you yourself, taking yourself and take you, like I said earlier on, take whatever you learn personally. You are, from a Buddhist point of view, not the result of some celestial being, a celestial being's mind being moved by a motivation to create you. So this is not necessarily the Abrahamic faith, but it's in the Hindu tradition. For instance, they describe certain celestial beings, Brahma, for instance, or Ishvara, as said to be, Ishvara in particular, being regarded, being seen as a creator god, whose mind is moved by an intention to create something, and therefore it creates it. So the mind is moved to create something, and then it creates us, it creates the environment, situations, etc. Now that is denied here. From a Buddhist point of view, well, there may be these celestial beings, no problem about that, but the part of creation, that's an issue that they've created, because our experiences are created by causes and conditions. So they're not created by the movement of some intention by some other being, but they're created by causes and conditions, which also includes our own motivation in the past, the motivation we generated at some point in the past, which accounts for certain actions we accumulated or we performed in the past, and that these actions leaving behind an imprint which now ripens in the form of different experiences. But those are causes and conditions, and it's not just the motivation. There are other factors that are at play that account for each and every experience we have. So that is the first kind of feature, that everything that is impermanent exists independent on causes and conditions. The second line says, the second feature is described by the words, because this has been produced, that is produced. It's saying that it's not sufficient to have causes and conditions, but you have causes and conditions that are impermanent. So you can't have permanent causes and conditions that give rise to whatever they give rise to. So our present situation, for instance, they have to be impermanent, which refutes, for instance, the idea that, well, I don't know, but it seems like in I don't know, even though in Christianity, I don't think in Christianity you have the idea of the mind of the, there's no explanation of the mind of God. And I guess there's a sense that God is permanent. So it seems that creation happens in dependence on something permanent. I'm not sure about the explanation in the Jewish religion, but is God ever changing? Is there a sense God is eternal and non-changing, although God engages in activities, but nonetheless, I don't know. I think we have to ask a theologist, someone who knows better. But there's a sense there's this permanent nature of God. And there are some philosophical systems in India that don't believe in God, but in some kind of underlying principle that is permanent, from which everything arises. And again, to counteract that there is no permanent causes and conditions that give rise to something, that creates something, it's important to understand that causes and conditions have to be impermanent. And then the third characteristic, the third feature that is described in the sutra is conditioned by ignorance. There are formative actions. Conditioned by formative action, there's consciousness and so forth. Or conditioned by ignorance are formative actions. Conditioned by formative actions is consciousness, etc. And that describes the fact that not only do things arise from causes and conditions which have to be impermanent? They need to have the potential to give rise to something. Not every cause, not every condition can give rise to anything. So there needs to be a certain correlation between the cause and its effect, which of course accounts for the fact that our experiences that we desire, they are the result of performing actions that are desirable for other sentient beings, so that are beneficial for other sentient beings. They lead to experiences we consider to be beneficial, and so forth. Now, these three aspects are described by the Rice Seedling Sutra, the way I just described. So they describe the fact that phenomena are not created by the movement of a celestial being's mind. They're not created by something permanent, and they're not created by something that doesn't have the potential to create it. And then actually these are three aspects that we learn in dependence on the Rice Seedling Sutra. And again, we need to bring this into our own life. In what way is that important to us? And there are other aspects that we also learned from the Rice Seedling Sutra. On top of these two aspects, there's the aspect of not only do things come in existence in dependence on a cause and a condition that is impermanent and has the potential to do so, but it's in dependence on a diversity of causes and conditions, many different causes and conditions. That is one aspect. And these causes and conditions, they don't exist inherently and independently, and neither does the result. So we learn that as also, those are two other features that are described in the Rice Seedling Sutra. So causes and conditions, they don't exist independently, objectively, they're merely labeled. We'll come to this. Plus, of course, it's always a diversity of different causes and conditions. Now, this understanding, how is that in any way relevant to our daily life? How can that help us in our Dharma practice? Well, it helps us in all aspects of Dharma practice to understand that there is not a single cause. That's really important. And that these causes change all the time, that we may hold on to something that has created, but this is already gone. Whatever we hold on to, this is responsible for this my situation. Well, that is responsible. It's no longer there. Whatever caused that, whatever we make responsible for a certain problem, it's no longer there. It has changed in the process of giving rise. So holding on to it and blaming it, it's like blaming something, blaming, I don't know, the horns of a rabbit, a flying cow. It doesn't exist right now. Well, it's never existed, but in terms of the cause that gave rise to the problem, right now it's no longer there. So what am I holding on to? And the fact is not just that, there are many other causes and conditions that gave rise to this situation. Mainly, and here we can differentiate between causes and conditions that are mainly responsible, mainly my own motivation in the past, my own mental actions which gave rise to physical and verbal actions. So mainly it comes down to my consciousness, my mind, what my thoughts were, what they give rise to. Okay, now that is extremely helpful. And of course, that my positive kinds of actions, they led to negative types of experiences. So the experiences I have right now, well, many causes and conditions cause them. But usually the main aspect I deem responsible, which is usually an external factor, is not mainly responsible. It's actions of the past, the mind in the past that's no longer there has accumulated. Okay, so there's no holding on to. It doesn't make sense to hold on to negative states of mind I've had them gone. Maybe long, many ages, many lifetimes ago, I've had these thoughts. Well, I've moved on, so big deal. But these imprints, they were left on the mind and they account for the experiences I have. And the beauty of that is that this gives me the freedom now. This understanding gives me the freedom to determine, to act in a way in which I can basically create. My mind is the creator now of new experiences, but that are desirable by way of acting ethically. I mean, that's where ethical behavior comes in. You can be as unethical as you like. Well, be it, but carry the consequences, because you're the one who mainly has to carry the consequences. All right. Now, this understanding is the basis of Buddhism. No matter what you do, whatever you do, all it comes down to this. This is the basis. This is the basis that is explained. And if you don't practice the basis, everything that follows from there, understanding of emptiness, understanding, it just won't happen. Compassion, you won't be able to generate these states of mind most effectively. Now, don't let go of that understanding. Generate a good understanding of the features I've just described. And we'll do this now, generating that foundational understanding. We do this in the state of in the form of a meditation. We'll meditate on this now. I apologize, it took a little longer to explain this, but this is really the basis for the 12 links and the basis for everything. Okay. Now, it's easily understood. It doesn't take much time, but to take it deeper and to affect you on an emotional level, that's a different matter. All right, so let's do this together now. Do a meditation on this. It's not a meditation, it's an analytical meditation, of course. It's not where you arise as the object you meditate on. No, you analyze. We're analyzing. And towards the end, like last time, I'll ask you to focus on whatever insight you've gained and apply single-pointed meditation, in which you allow whatever you've learned, whatever insight you've come into, you allow this to sink deeper, make it part of your innermost psyche, in that it actually can affect your emotional responses to certain situations. And not just when you're in meditation or when you're listening to a teaching, but in daily life. All right, so let's do this. We'll start again with a few moments of breathing, maybe a minute or two to just let go of any disruptive thoughts, and then I'll guide you through the meditation. Now become aware of your own mind and your own body. Your mind and body, which are those aspects that define you. In particular, your mental consciousness. Both of those, mind and body, are impermanent. Which means they're changing moment by moment. they're non-static, as in one moment giving rise to the next, giving rise to the next. Forming a continuum in time. This is also true for the experience we have. The experience we have from the moment we wake up to the time we go to bed. It's an ever-changing continuum of experiences, mental experiences. And those have arisen in dependence on other factors, and dependence on causes and conditions. But these causes do not refer to the mind of a creator God. That had the intention to create our experiences. In other words, our mind, body, and experiences were not created by a celestial creator God. But rather by a diversity of causes and conditions. Which are impermanent. Which in the process of giving rise to our experiences, to our mind and body, transform into something different. So that the causes and conditions that give rise to our mind right now, our body right now, no longer exist. Therefore, our present mind and body was created by numerous causes and conditions that are impermanent. And on top of that, they were created by causes and conditions that had the potential to give rise to this present mind and body. So with regard to our present mind, it is mainly a former moment of mind that give rise to this present moment. Our body cannot transform into mind. Since it's not an experiencing entity. Only the mind has that potential to give rise to mind. And only beneficial states of mind created our positive, our beneficial experiences, desirable experiences. And only undesirable states of mind have the potential to create undesirable experiences that we may have right now. Therefore, whatever we experience on a daily basis, physical sensations, mental sensations, and even the situations we encounter in daily life, were mainly created by our mind sometime in the past. A continuum that has always existed, and therefore, with these experiences, being the result of an action that goes back possibly many lifetimes. And what's important for us to understand is that it is our mind right now that is the cause for our future experiences. So our present state of mind and our state of mind this afternoon, tomorrow, and so forth determines our future. Whether our future experiences are painful, confused, and full of fear, or peaceful, full of contentment and happiness. Therefore, our mind right now is an impermanent cause that holds the potential for our future experiences, together with other causes and conditions. But since our mind is the main cause, and we are able to learn to control our mind, we can learn to control our future experiences. It's totally up to us. Our actions of body, speech, and mind are mainly controlled by our mind, which is the one thing we can actually learn to control. The only thing we can truly learn to control. So now to conclude this meditation, take whatever insight you've gained through this analysis and spend a few moments single-pointedly focusing on it. So that your insight has an effect on your emotional responses. So now gently arise from your meditation. All right. Now hopefully you've been able to apply these features that we learned in particular from this Rice Seedling Sutra, but of course you can apply these to any situation, but I chose here to apply it to our own mind, which is the center of everything, and of course most important in terms of our future experiences. All right. And so what we actually learn here, like I said earlier on, that anything that arises from causes and conditions, these causes and conditions, they are a continuum, continuously going on, changing all the time, giving rise to the continuum, the present continuum, continuing on to the future, to a future continuum. And in that way, this understanding of a continuum that of course doesn't exist in a bubble on its own, affected by other continuums that are also interacting with each other, but still continuing on in that particular form, that is extremely important. And it helps us to understand the nature of the mind, in that the mind, the mental continuum in particular, it continues on. Sometimes it's coarser, sometimes it's subtler. When we fall asleep, for instance, it's subtler. When we wake up, it's coarser. When we die, similar to the process of falling asleep, it becomes subtler again, and it becomes extremely subtle in such a way that it can exist independently of our body, so that while we die, or the moment of death being the moment where the mind separates from this body and then continues on, depending on the nature of, or the quality of this mind, in the sense of what are the residues that were left on our mind, what was left on the mind that now determines how the mind continues to exist. For us ordinary beings, we're reborn again. We experience, due to our desire, our grasping, our craving for existence, we'll again, and because we've created causes for existence, well, we'll continue again to be reborn. That is, our mind continues with a different body, right? That grows again in the form of a fetus first. It grows into a baby. If we're born as humans, then again we go through these stages that we've went through in this life, And our mind creates new experiences, leaves karmic seeds behind that again determine the experiences in that life, but also in where we're reborn in the future, and so forth. So understanding the continuum of the mind, if we meditate more on the mind, I mean, just from the moment of mental awareness, since we were very little, if you think about it, like probably have some memory of when you were very small, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old. That's probably the time uh, that's probably the earliest memory. You're aware that there was a mental consciousness, that there was a mind having thoughts and so forth. Now, from that time onwards until now, there's a continuum. I think we're aware of this fact that this is a continuum where earlier moments, the things we learned, the experiences we had, the thoughts we had reacting to those experiences. And that's important. It's less the experiences, but it's more what we do with it. Do we take it in a positive way or in a negative way? That again formed our experiences now and will form our experiences up to the moment we die. But for some bizarre reason, we have a really hard time, or for a number of bizarre reasons, we have a hard time to say, yeah, but the continuum of this mind that we had when we were, let's say, 5 years old, well, tracing it back, well, very hard time to think that this continuum was a continuum earlier on, that we've existed in the past. And of course, even more important, that this continuum of mind goes on even in the future as nothing. There's nothing whose continuum, nothing, the continuum of which can be totally cut. Now, with physical objects, of course, they're made of atoms, molecules, and so forth. Now, they disperse and they come together in different forms. But even then, there's nothing physical that can totally go out of existence. It can only transform and reassemble with other physical aspects in a different way. The mind is not made of particles. The mind is non-physical, it's an experiencing entity. When we say mind, we label mind on the basis of an experiencing entity. And even though it does so in dependence on other conditions such as the brain waves or brain activity, external objects that we perceive, all this, these are kind of secondary conditions, cooperative conditions that make this the experiences that form the experiences of our mind. But that does not do anything, or that does not mean that the mind is not a separate entity, in that it's changing moment by moment, and an experiencing entity gives rise to another experiencing entity. And the beginning of the mind in this lifetime, well, the beginning of that is just another mind, a previous moment of mind, which accounts for the fact our mind existed before we existed at the passing of this life, and it will continue to exist as in a particular form as of the whoever we are in the future, and is labeled on whatever experiences we have in the future, that we talk of rebirth, of being again thrown into an existence due to the karmic conditions, to whatever was left on our mind due to our volitional actions of body, of mind, sorry, of mind, which then determines how we talk and how we act physically. Now, if we understand this process, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense, but it requires some analysis, which we can't do here, because we need to get into the 12 links, but which you can do comfortably on your own, and also observation of your mind, of this entity that from moment to moment is an experiencing entity. And in that way, you can actually establish for yourself that the mind existed before you were born and will continue after your death. And that's just another way of saying there's past and future lives. And we need to check, what is it that gives us such a hard time. I'm saying, even if you say you believe in past and future lives, even if you intellectually feel you believe, how deep is that conviction? How deep is that conviction? How deep does it go into, on what level does it affect you, so that emotionally you are concerned with your future lives? Because if you compare what lies ahead and what happens in this life is pretty insignificant. Significant only in that it creates the future experiences, but in comparison, this life is very short. But we often live, even if we believe there are future lives, we live as if there was only this lifetime. And we spend so much time and energy working for things that are actually only lasting for a really short time. So career, reputation, um, material comfort, and so forth. So if we have already some kind of belief in future lives, past lives are less important. We only use the understanding of past lives to establish the future, but the past is past, it's gone. Now what's important is what's right now, and of course what happens in the future, what we create for the future. So therefore the future is important, and the future, there are a lot of lifetimes lying ahead. And let's face it, for those who still have a hard time with past and future lives, well, there's a possibility there are, and wouldn't you want to know? If there are future lives, it's important we are prepared. It's like, for instance, if you believe there's only today, the only time there is today, there's nothing more. That would be like believing there's only this lifetime and there's nothing afterwards. Well, if for some reason tomorrow goes on and the day after tomorrow, we would want to know because we would prepare accordingly. And we don't live our lives as if there was only today. We do prepare for tomorrow and the day after, usually in terms of short term, but we do prepare our health, the way we look after our health, the way we go shopping, the way we pay our insurances and we go to work. There is a sense there is going to be a tomorrow and a day after that, and we're preparing for all that. Now, that preparation is great, it's essential, but we should prepare even further than that. It's important to consider even the future. And this is what we learn here with the 12 links. So to bring it back to the 12 links, to a more extensive version of the 12 links. And as I said, this is dependence on mainly causes and conditions that is described here. But as we go into the 12 links, it's important, and there are different versions of the 12 links that I'll introduce this time. There is an afflicted version, there's a purified version, there's a forward sequence, there's a reverse sequence. Not difficult to understand, just the words make it sound very complicated. So I'll introduce all this to you, but to get a sense initially, to get kind of a sense through the meditation we did and by way of this explanation, there's a continuum of consciousness and you better look after it. If there is future life, you'll better know about it, because if you're just prepared for this lifetime, that is not enough. And like I said, we have a sense of future lives because we pay insurances. We pay, well, we have a pension fund because we have a sense of what lies in the future. We need to be prepared. Now we need the pension fund, or the future life fund. That is our own mind to prepare accordingly. And this process here explains us how this takes place. All right. And so however terse and weird this may sound, make it part of your own. Bring it alive with regard to your own mind. Now, where do we start? Of course, we start with the misapprehension of reality. We start with a misapprehension of reality, and that is a huge topic in itself. And I'll give you a detailed explanation of how we come, and we did this only very briefly last time, but more detailed, how this misapprehension leads to other afflictive emotions and how that then leads to performing certain actions. That process is one of the most important processes. Now, when it comes to the misapprehension of reality, actually, our mind is full of misapprehensions of reality, different forms. And some of them are of the 12 links, the first link, in that they give rise to the other aspects that create our future experiences. And some of them are not. It depends. So the first link, as in like determining where we're going to be reborn sometime in the future, part of our misapprehension, part of that is part of our misapprehensions are a first link, because there are different links that we create, different cycles we create all the time. New formative actions we create on the mind, which then lie with the mind, remain with the mind until they ripen in the future. And we create actions all the time. But let's first understand that ignorance, that misapprehension. And of course, you remember the drawing we had. We'll go back to this later, but I explained it last time. So let's go back. How was it depicted? It was depicted in the form of an old person with a wobbly cane. Okay, so here it's saying an old person. Well, there are different reasons for that, but usually one reason could be that we've had this misapprehension since beginningless time, so it's really ancient. And it's also not strong, like an old person lacking the kind of strength that a young person would have. Well, it's not strong because it's not rooted in reality. It has no basis in reality, so it lacks strength. It is strong, but not as strong as love and compassion and, of course, wisdom. But all states of mind, they are based on reality. And needing a cane, it doesn't know what lies ahead, and it causes us to wander around very confused, which is a very interesting, that's an idea of a word that we use a lot in Buddhism, but it doesn't come across that way so much in English. There is a word, Droa in Tibetan. Droa. Droa is the one that goes, or the one that wanders. The one that wanders. So we basically wander through life driven by our misapprehension of reality. And the word that is used is migratory being. It's another word for living being. But that's just a nicer word than saying a person who's just wandering around. That's really what it means. The Tibetan word is Droa, is someone who's just wandering around, kind of aimlessly, if you like, because usually it's not liberation or enlightenment that governs our actions. It's confusion. So we wander around, being thrown from one situation to the next, from one life to the next, without much control. There's certain control we have, but let's face it, there are a lot of things we really can't determine, we can't control. And the only thing we could really control is our own mind that is actually responsible for our experiences. But that right now just runs wild. Okay. Now, therefore, misapprehension is described as that older person existing since beginningless time with a cane, not knowing what lies ahead. All right, causing us to wander around in a confused way. That is also in the center of this drawing that we've had. It's described also as the root in the form of a pig. We've heard the pig. So it's actually, ignorance is described here in this drawing in twofold form. So one is as part of the 12 links, as in like the elderly person. And then it's also in the center of the wheel, it's described as a pig. We don't need to show this picture right now. You probably remember from last time. If you have it in front of you, you could have a look at it. So why like a pig? Well, because a pig makes a big mess of a clean place, just looking after food. It delights in kind of putting its nose in the dirt to just find some scraps of food, and it's actually ignorance of its owner. So I guess it's grateful to seeing the owner when it gives it food, but it's usually the one that's also either killing it himself or herself, or actually selling it on to a butcher. So in that sense, the pig is chosen, although it would be okay for other animals too. And now it's important to understand that this ignorance, it's the Tibetan word is marikpa, which just means not knowing. And here the word itself doesn't give us much sense of what it means. Actually, there are different types, of course. There is ignorance that is not called misapprehension. It's still called an ignorance in that it doesn't know, not knowing the alphabet or not knowing something. That's a type of ignorance, of course. And then there are the types that are not like just confused about something, but they misapprehend things. In fact, that they are diametrically opposed in terms of how they perceive their objects to a mind that perceives reality. They're the exact opposite. They perceive the exact opposite of what is actually there, how things really exist. So now here, the misapprehension we are interested in is the second type. It's diametrically opposed to how things exist. And then there's two types again. I think I've mentioned them. I'm not sure, but one type denigrates its object, and the other superimposes it, which is just another way of saying one type of misapprehension denies the existence of something that does exist, and one type of misapprehension kind of apprehends or superimposes. It apprehends something that actually doesn't exist. So it adds something to the way it perceives things. All right. And here, the root misapprehension, of course, is the second time. It adds more to things than they actually have. All right. Then we also have afflicted misapprehensions and non-afflicted misapprehensions. To just give you a sense of the different types, to understand the one type we're interested in a little better. Okay, let me check how we are with time. Okay. Let me check. What time is it now? It's got 2 more minutes. Okay. So now, with regard to here we talk about afflicted misapprehension and non-afflicted misapprehension. So an afflicted misapprehension is the ignorance, the misapprehension of reality, because it gives rise to the other afflictions. And in that sense, it's afflicted in that it keeps us from liberation. But there's also a non-afflicted kind of type. For instance, if you have eliminated all the afflictive emotions, you're an arhat, you may still have, for instance, perceive, because of problem with your eye consciousness, perceive, I don't know, a snow mountain that's actually white because of the light. You perceive it as red, for instance, or as blue. And there's a mental consciousness that holds on to that. Now, that is a non-afflicted misapprehension. You get rid of it once you become a Buddha, but it's not an afflicted misapprehension. It does not give rise to anger and so forth. Then there is the misapprehension that is the root of samsara, and there are misapprehensions that are not the root of samsara. There are innate misapprehensions and misapprehensions that we've intellectually acquired based on our innate misperception of, for instance, inherent existence. We then build a whole philosophical system that promotes, for instance, independent existence and so forth. That's just intellectually acquired. Then there's ignorance that apprehends, for instance, the inherent existence of oneself, and then the or of a self, apprehending the inherent existence of a self versus apprehending the inherent existence of other phenomena, or apprehending the inherent existence of only oneself and other selves. As in terms of oneself, I apprehend the inherent existence of myself or the inherent existence of other people, of other persons. So there's so many different varieties with regard to perceiving inherent existence, but also misperceiving that which is permanent, that which is impermanent to be permanent, that which is actually in the nature of creating more problems to be in the nature of happiness, and so forth. Now, there are so many different types, and our lives are governed by those ones. But the underlying one, the root of everything, is the first link. All right, we need to take a break. I'm already a little bit past. Okay, it's 31. Let's take a break, and I'll see you again in half an hour. Is that right? Is that right? Great. Okay, please take a break.